Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to everybody. I'm Preacher Moss, host of the SOS Shout Out Show. Don't panic, brothers and sisters. While this is a church scene behind me, I want you to rest assured you didn't miss your weekend. It's still Thursday. Today we're talking about understanding our black history, and today's subject will be the black church. Now, this holds a certain amount of personal history, a certain amount of overall history, and about relationships. A relationship that's been, I want to say, tested and molded and adapted since African Americans came here through slavery and, of course, the Middle Passage. Listen, brothers and sisters, this is a little bit of an interesting thing because now I have been Muslim over 30 years. That's not the thing. The thing is to be able to appreciate what that process is. A lot of times we talk about Islam and Christianity, and we don't even talk about some of the other religions that we're involved in. But I thought for Black History Month, it'd be really interesting to look at what the scope and the forbearance of the Black Church actually was, has been, and maybe what it has been before. It's not what it is now. With, I want to say, a strong through line of understanding that it has been one of the most amazing things in the world. The power of the Black church is something that can never be underserved. It can never be underestimated. It has been a part of miracles for the upliftment for African Americans here in this country and the upliftment of spirits and inspiration for around the world. There's no greater miracle than the Black church in the United States. Not just Christianity, but Christianity, Islam, and other religions. The idea that people will go through a metamorphosis, particularly in this country, whereby they would take something that was used to oppress them, rewind it, reframe it, realign it, and again find through this process liberation. Process, I want to say success. Process, brothers and sisters, where we had a higher understanding of ourselves in the most difficult of times. I would say if there wasn't a Black church from the beginning, and when I say from the beginning, I'm talking about when Africans came here on this soil. And you know that you already know that 30-some% of Africans that came in the United States were Muslim. They came from Muslim countries. But the thing I want everybody to focus on today is just a little bit of appreciation. You know, we've always heard the story about civil rights and things like that in the church, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, and so on, brothers and sisters. But I want us to take it from an everyday level of the people who live these changes, not the leaders, but the followers who did the hard work, the followers who did the scenario where they got their hands dirty, the people who weren't successful in religion but made it so that they were successful in other areas. Shout out to Richard Allen. Now, as we get in this, brothers and sisters, feel free to jump in. Feel free to jump in, add your comments, because I'm not going to always be right. And there's a part of the show that's going to be a little bit controversial, and I'm going to talk about that as well. Because there's been an evolution in the idea of the Black church. I've said it numerous times that with the latest scope of activism following George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we had a scenario where activism did not actively involve the church. Now people will say, what do you mean, preach? It didn't actively involve the church. There are reasons for that. And it becomes larger and larger and larger why the Black church is so important. Because the disassociation from the Black church, in some regards, has been a stumbling block for a lot of liberation, a lot of pro-justice activism efforts, because it doesn't have a basis. Not that that's successful, I'm saying that they don't necessarily have a basis. Now listen, we're going to get rolling here because we got a lot of stuff to cover. So please, in advance, allow me to welcome you to the Shout Out Show. This is Understanding Our Black History, and we're going to be talking about the Black church. We'll be right back.
we just need help.
Imagine if there wasn't an olive branch. Muslim Family Services at your command. The people who help people have to say, we need your donations, don't delay. We all have struggles from time to time, but leaders dedicated is what you find. Before another person sheds a tear, support Olive Branch, you don't have to fear. Olive Branch Muslim Family Services. Action you can see, compassion you can feel. Sing it with me. Ooh. Ooh. All right, we're back. We are back. Let me go ahead and welcome everybody to the show. We have our Shout Out Soldiers. You know, this is our own little version of Black History Month. Having the Shout Out Show going this into our second year. I think it's our second year of doing this. It's really fun to look back and think about some of the inspirations that I had. You know, some of the inspirations that we talked about have actually been subjects on the Shout Out Show. Of course, Max Robinson and people like Oprah and things like that, and some of our religious leaders, you know, they just kind of build this point. And I want to say this before I introduce a Shout Out Show family. You know, this year is really interesting because I want to talk about institutions that have come from the Black community. So I want to talk about HBCUs, I want to talk about Black church, I want to talk about Black industry, I want to talk about Black arts. And I am going to make sure that I pull some of my favorite people out of those spaces. Some you know, some you don't know. But I want to make sure that I'm sharing that with you because I want Black History Month to be in the way that, yes, Carter G. Woodson had originated, that it was going to be a situation, for lack of a better word, that this is going to be a time for serious study. So I feel like if I'm just putting out stuff that's out there every Black History Month, we're not doing serious study. So let me begin that process, and I beg for your patience and understanding because, you know, a lot of times with Black History Month, we are kind of stuck in a certain rut and we do it a certain way. So I'm going to introduce this some non-conventional ways, some non-traditional ways, and I'm going to ask for your leeway and your trust as we do it. So let's go ahead and get our folks in here on the Shout Out Show. Let's get our family in here. We got Sister Mary Moss. Happy day. Groundhog Day. Stay warm. Okay. See? All right. You know, I totally forgot it was Groundhog Day. Satana, did you know? She's like, nah, stop it, Allah. Nah, I didn't know it was Groundhog Day. I just know it was cold. So it's a cold day, but I'll get around to Groundhog Day later. Thank you very much, Mama Son. Next up, we got Sister Reed. Hello to you, Sister Reed. Peace and blessings to you and your family. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for tuning in. You're a part of the Black History, within Black History on the Shout Out Show. We appreciate you. A long-term, devoted follower, brothers and sisters of the Shout Out Show. We're talking about Sister Reed and her family. Much blessed to you and Derek and Juwan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next up, she said, oh, that's right. I had a picture of my mom with Mr. Chappelle and taking a picture back then and Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving time. There you go. Nice picture. Next up, we got Johnny L. Thomas, our other resident Black historian. What's going on, JT? Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, brother, we're going to try and talk about Black History Month, but we're going to try and put it in this framework of the Black church today. And if anything you want to add in, make sure you get it in the comment section early so we can get it on screen and we can talk about it. All right? I know some folks put the comments in at the end of the show. Don't do that. Put them up early and let Sister Satana put you guys in the stream and we can talk about it. Like I said, this is an open discussion. All right? Okay, next up. Got Brother Altaf Rashid. What's going on, Brother Rashid? We appreciate you on the show, better known as that Canadian ambassador to the show, Mr. 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. How's that weather up there in Toronto, man? How's it treating you? Let us know. All right. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you again for your participation. Next up, what's up, Brother Eric? Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, man. I think we missed you yesterday, but I'm glad to see you on the show today. Here on the stream, man, brother, we're going to be talking about that Black church today. Now, I can't remember now. Brother Eric, were you born Muslim or did you convert like myself? We're going to talk about this church today. Got to get it in. All right. There you go. Next up. Oh, Sister Satana did not put herself in the stream. Oh, my gosh. She's just pressing all the wrong buttons today. We got Sister Ika. Sister Ika, coming all the way from Depok, Indonesia. We appreciate you, Sister Ika. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if there are any black churches out there in Depok, Indonesia, please let us know right away. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I know that was unnecessary, but I went there. Next up. And here we go. We got Sister Tana, who is so worked up about the black church that she is pressing the wrong buttons today. I'm just kidding. We got Sister Tana, our consultant producer, without which none of this happens, brothers and sisters. Don't think that I'm just here by accident. This is when somebody learns a process, it liberates you to do other things. So she has liberated me to do other things. Because you know when she's not there, you can tell it's not there because I'm just stuck right here. I'm like the Black Max Headroom right here. We don't move nowhere. All right. All talk. We say we have some snow we can send your way. Hey, you know, brother, Allah said never refuse a gift from another Muslim, but you can keep that one. Thank you so much. All right. Brother Eric said that he converted in 1993. All right, brother, we were around the same time there, brother. I was a little bit earlier than you, but we're around the same time. All right. So let's get to this space about understanding the black church. Let me set the stage for you for how the black church comes around formally. First of all, it's not in the 1800s. It's in the late 1700s. Richard Allen, former slave, buys his freedom. Hear what I'm saying now? He buys his freedom. And at this point in time, blacks and whites would worship together. He had a black church, there was a white church. St. George Church, his was the Bethel Church. And the Bethel Church would go at this one point in time, and they would go and pray with the white parishioners. This one particular time they went to the church, the white parishioners said, no, don't pray with us. Wait till we finish and leave, and then you could pray. And at this point in time, Mr. Allen said, I'll do you one better. We're just going to leave now. We'll never come back to this church, which they never did. And they started their own church. Pretty revolutionary stuff you're talking about before the 1800s. What he did is he created the bedrock for the AME, the African Methodist Episcopalian Church, the AME. Now, here's the thing I want everybody to understand. There was a situation going on whereby these people were developing churches. African Americans were developing churches. But there was a conspiracy of the white church to take over these churches. So you have a fundamental philosophical difference of who God is. The white people going, no, you will serve the way we are. And the black people, no, we can do you better. We're going to serve God, and we're going to have our own property to do it. So it becomes largely, at the beginning, an argument over real estate, over ownership. Now, I'd like to say it's ownership over the church. No, it's ownership over the ability to express your religious tradition. Now, we all know about Africans and Muslims in that space, but let's be honest. At a certain time, brothers and sisters, here in the United States, the trail of Muslim, African American, African Islam here in this country dies out. Your slaves get older, the tradition is not passed, and so it finds itself in this Christian, I like to say in this Christian tradition. It's a hodgepodge, if you will. So some of the things that are practiced are not the things that were practiced in the white church. They brought back some of their own traditions, the things that they thought were valuable to worship and sustainability of community. And when they had sustainability of community, they had this whole idea of we will build our own. This is the first case of do for self, if you will. I'm going all the way back to the 1700s. As it evolves, brothers and sisters, there's a couple of things that happen. Number one, there is a creation, if you will. I want to say a movement that actually begins to break down the hypocrisy of white religion. Let me say it again. There's a movement that's stated to break down the hypocrisy of white religion. This becomes the bedrock of a lot of course, black liberation movements. So you want to say, hey, the church is not involved. It is, but at this point in time, there's such a big demand on the church. Because even in the times of slavery, we're talking the 1700s, for over a little over 100 years, a little under 100 years, the church is the only place where slaves can have community, They can have gatherings. They can have, I want to say, cultural exchange, a little educational exchange. The church served all of that. Now, as slavery ended, it still had to encompass those things. But there's a tradition that changes, which goes with the great migration of churches. Now, many of you guys know at the turn of the century, in 1900s, over 80% of African Americans were below the Mason-Dixon line, which means they were down south. And so the migration comes. And the framework and the necessity of the work and the presence of church changes. It has to have a different texture up north, not what it had down south. It has to have a different texture out west, not what it had down south. And as it will grow, brothers and sisters, the church takes on a much more tremendous role, and it's not in something that is established in terms of a political body. Let me say what I mean. It's not a union. The black church is not a union. The black church is not a corporation. It's not even a nonprofit at this point in time. The black church is a body that holds information and inspiration and aspiration. And that's what it produces, particularly from the 1800s after slavery up until, of course, the Industrial Revolution and into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which introduces space, if you will, for new religions. One of them is Islam. Now, a lot of people say that Islam was really introduced in the 1920s by the Gujarati Indians that came over. That's not true. Islam had been here. It had framed and metamorphosized itself, but again, it held itself, of course, to this whole idea of service and God. People say, what is the connection between African Americans and African American Muslims in terms of Islam and Christianity? I was like, because we all had a foundational understanding of what are the things that oppress us. One of the things about Islam in America is, and people didn't like it, but this was the first scope of religious thought that says, wait a minute, I'm going to identify God, and then I'm going to identify the people that oppress me in the presence of God. And that becomes Islam. So listen, we are going to take a quick break. Now we ain't going to take a quick break. We're going to run this video and come back. I'm a little bit off time, but I just want to make sure you get this foundation. We'll work it out. We'll be done in a half hour, but we got a lot of information to cover today. Satana, can you roll that video, please? Thank you.
Christianity and slavery were long intertwined. While masters believed that their religion could be used to pacify their slaves, African Americans transformed Christianity and created a new culture that would serve as the foundation of their freedom struggle.
The oldest independent African American denomination is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded in Philadelphia in 1794 by Richard Allen, the formerly enslaved black man who purchased his own freedom.
Black religious leaders such as Reverend Allen took a strong abolitionist stance, even helping slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. During the Civil War, some served as army chaplains, and once the war ended, many mobilized black political participation. Some even held public office.
The black church provided leadership opportunities for men and women who, by and large, were in subservient positions in the workforce. And so all of these preachers doing work in the black church have been critical to giving black people a space to envision that a different world is possible.
The late 1800s saw a dramatic proliferation of black churches, and the church remained central to black life through the 20th century, particularly at the height of the Civil Rights Movement.
In the 1960s, the church is playing a much more overtly militant and political role in terms of trying to organize people to defeat Jim Crow, end racism, and also to promote economic equality.
The tradition of black religious leaders shepherding the freedom struggle reached its pinnacle with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King fused religion, nonviolent resistance, and the prophetic tradition to challenge Jim Crow, while invoking the musical legacy of the spirituals that enslaved African Americans had created. Today, The black church remains a fundamentally important institution in the black community.
The black church has had to be everything to black people because American society was unwilling to do so. Today, we don't need the church to do the same things for us, but do I think the church is still a relevant institution? Absolutely. It is the place that you can come and rebuild your spirit after you deal with the spiritual assault on black life that many African Americans experience because of enduring histories of racism and discrimination.
Okay, I showed you that first for a reason. One of my favorite historians, may Allah be pleased with him, is a man named Manning Marable. He passed away a couple years ago, and there was some controversy. He did the last major historical work on Malcolm X, and a lot of people got upset with him. He was a fantastic historian, whether you like his results or not. But he gives a different view about the black church in terms of the civil rights movement. I've watched this a couple times, and there's some nuances that are there that explains where we are now in terms of how we view the black church. Roll it when you're ready, Satana.
To understand the role of the black church during the civil rights movement in the 50s, you need to go back about a century. During slavery, the only institution that white racists, the slaveholders, would permit people of African descent to have as their own was the church. The church was the only place where blacks could congregate together in prayer, but they also used that site of faith as a place of gathering resistance, of plotting rebellion. And after the Civil War was over, the church became the only institution where you had a leadership caste, usually of black men, who could authentically represent the interest of the black community because their salaries were paid for by black folk. Thus, the black church in the 1940s and 50s was an institution that had resources, it had a leadership elite of black ministers, and it had the institutional ability to help fund long-term protests that were being waged by working class and low-income people. The black church provided the institutional means for carrying out the campaigns that were waged in the small towns. But at the same time, as a historian, it must be noted that the majority of black churches in major cities did not engage in civil disobedience or in the campaigns led by Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Congress of Racial Equality. Most black ministers stood on the sidelines. So if you look at, say, in Montgomery, perhaps 10 to 15 black churches were actively involved in the campaign in 1955-56 to end the racial segregation on public buses. In Birmingham in 63, perhaps 25 or 30 out of the more than 200 black churches in the city. To understand the role of the black church during the civil rights movement.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. I'll be right back. Brothers and sisters, thank you so much for tuning in. We're talking about understanding our black history, speaking about black churches.
Hey, babies. Welcome to Radio WCUC, Convenient Urgent Care, home of the smart patient. This is DJ What It Do. You know what time it is. It's the top of the hour, and the request lines are open. You know what you want to hear. I know what you want to hear. Operators are waiting.
I just got to hear Don't Get the COVID.
Don't get the COVID. Put your mask back on. The Delta COVID, more contagious than before. Don't get the COVID. Go on and get the vaccine. You know that it can keep you safe. And your people living up in your space. Don't get the COVID, you need to wash your hands. The Delta COVID is more deadly than before. Don't get the COVID, go on and get your vaccine. You know that it can keep you from dying. Don't leave your family all alone and crying. Don't get the COVID.
We invite you to join our fight against COVID and against misinformation. It's time to listen to the doctors and trust the science.
When I think of people dying that don't have to die, it makes me sad. Now is the time to be sober. Together we can make this thing over. Let's fight the COVID. Convenient urgent care, home of the smart patient.
All right, we are back live. Thank you guys so much for sticking with us. You know, sort of a wrap up talking about the black church, particularly with that piece of Manning Marable. One of the interesting things is as we have moved forward in terms of social advocacy, dealing with social justice issues, more and more and more, it's not involving the church as much. A lot of things we're talking about, social ills and things like that, we're not involving the church as much. We have, in some regards, relegated the church to a space of spiritual functionality, but it doesn't have communal functionality. You know, I was just riding down the road and I saw something and it reminded me of the way churches used to be, or how they were perceived. It was a COVID testing spot. A COVID testing spot. Now, a lot of churches had free COVID testing, things like that, but it was interesting that we used to have so much health care that ran through the churches. We're talking about blood pressure, health checks, things like that, and we don't have it as much, brothers and sisters, because I don't want to say it's a movement or conspiracy, or we've just let that relationship lapse, if you will. It has so much to do with the fact that we're not looking at the church in terms of that function anymore. We have somehow replaced it with other things. The church was a space where we had core identity, if you will. Let me explain core identity. Core identity is that I may not be these things Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but on Sunday for Christians and on Friday for Muslims, there was a core identity. Even if you didn't go to the church or the mosque, there was something that tied you to that religious institution, something that you didn't do. It's sort of like Ramadan, if you will. You don't have to go to a particular place to do Ramadan, but when you know during the month of Ramadan that these are the things we do, that's core identity. We moved away from that. We moved greatly away from that, and I would even throw out that I think it began largely in our education systems. When we had HBCUs that were tied into, of course, Christian churches, but as HBCUs moved away, and the whole idea of core identity was tied to jobs, it was tied to position, it was tied to money. We let the religion, if you will, the black church, ease out. In some cases, we even ease it out because this is what America was responding to. And let me throw this out here before we get too late. America never, ever, ever responded to the positivity, the importance, the relevancy of the black church, and they still don't. The only thing that has reduced the black church is the people that go to the black church. Or in this case, the people that don't go to the black church. Manning Marable was 100% right when he talked about the civil rights, because we are misled, brothers and sisters. And I wanted us to know that we need to be more active in our places of worship. The mosque, the church, the synagogue. And I'm not even saying where you necessarily go pray. I'm talking about places of worship you need to do. That was it. That was an impetus, if you will, for interfaith. So I'll throw that out there. So let me go to the wrap up. Here we go. Shout out to BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Again, that's BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. You can call 202-508-3780. Again, that's 202-508-3780. 3780. Get that information about your finances, particularly around tax time. And if you're thinking about getting a quality graduate level education, go to Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Go to bayanonline.org. Again, that's bayanonline.org. Check them out. And we'll give a shout out to our newest partner. Of course, that's USHub TV. That's USHUB.TV. USHub TV doing great things. The newest Muslim streaming platform in the community. Check them out. They're doing great things. And last but not least, we got to give a shout out, of course, to Convenient Urgent Care, our sponsor. Check them out at www.convenienturgent.com. Again, that's www.convenienturgent.com. That's our show for today. Black Church. See you guys on Monday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Black Church. Well, family, that's it for our show today. One of the reasons I felt compelled to make this video, because I noticed when an event is over, Muslims don't know when to leave. So if you're sitting there in front of your television, you're going, that was fun, that was enjoyable, what do I do now? This is me telling you to leave. You know why? Because the show is over. I already left. I taped this before I made it. So you have permission to leave. And you also have permission to come back. To the Shout Out Show, we are Monday through Thursday. Again, that's 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Central, and of course on the West Coast, 3 o'clock. So we want to thank you for coming on the show, my brothers and sisters. And guess what? This is yet another exercise for you to leave. Because I'm out of here. Later.